You've had this moment before. You're at a birthday party, the cake is revealed, and it's perfect. Not just good perfect. I mean, every swirl of icing is flawless, the layers are even, and somehow the chocolate glaze hasn't dripped a single millimeter out of place. And you think to yourself, wow, the baker really outdid themselves this time. Well, plot twist, there probably wasn't a baker in the traditional sense. That cake was likely born inside a giant, humming, stainless steel cathedral of food engineering, where ovens are the size of shipping containers and conveyor belts snake around like something out of a sci-fi movie. In fact, in the time it would have took you to read this sentence, one of these factories could have baked, cooled, frosted, and packaged another cake. These places are like the Tesla production line, but for dessert. Today, join FactoryX as we're taking a deep dive into this deliciously strange world, where millions of cakes roll off the line every year, looking like they've been handcrafted by a pastry wizard. Even though the real magic is done by machines, sensors, and a surprisingly large number of people in hairnets. And before you imagine something cold and soulless, let me stop you there. Cake factories have personalities. They have quirks. They even have inside jokes among the workers, like naming certain machines after celebrities, or marking the very last cake of the day with a tiny edible wink. But behind the humor is mind-blowing precision. Some factories run 24/7, producing up to 10,000 cakes an hour. That's 240,000 a day. Over 1 million in less than a week. Wrap your head around that. In a single month, one facility could make enough cakes for every single person in Los Angeles. So, how do they do it? How do you go from a mountain of flour and sugar to a perfectly packaged dessert ready to ship across the country? Let's start at the very beginning, before there's even batter, where our cake's journey really begins. The beginning, a cake's first breath. If you've ever baked at home, you know the first step is to gather your ingredients. In a cake factory, that process looks a little different. Actually, scratch that. It looks nothing like your kitchen. Picture this, giant silos outside the building, each holding thousands of pounds of flour. Long stainless steel pipes snake their way from these silos into the mixing area, where they connect to massive hoppers. When it's time to make a batch, the flour flows through like a river. No scooping, no mess, no oops, I spilled half the bag. Sugar, cocoa powder, and other dry ingredients are stored in equally massive containers, some big enough to walk inside. Then there are the liquids, oil, milk, and eggs. And here's where it gets wild. Most factories don't crack eggs individually. They use liquid egg that arrives in tanker trucks. One tanker can carry the equivalent of 500,000 eggs. That's more than some small towns go through in an entire year. Everything is measured by computerized scales with near-perfect accuracy. If the recipe calls for 100 kilograms of sugar, you're getting exactly 100 kilograms, not 100.1, not 99.9. That consistency is what makes factory cakes taste exactly the same whether you buy them in New York or Nevada. When the dry and wet ingredients meet, they're poured into industrial mixers. These machines don't look like the cute stand mixers on your counter. They're the size of a small car, with giant paddles or whisks spinning with just the right force. Here's a surprising fact. Mixing time is critical. Too little mixing, and the cake will be uneven. Too much, and you knock out all the air, leaving you with a dense, chewy sponge. Factories aim for just enough aeration to give the cake its fluffy texture. And yes, they use sensors to measure even the amount of air in the batter. At this point, the batter is silky, glossy, and smells heavenly. But don't get too comfortable. This stuff doesn't sit around. From here, it moves quickly to the next step, because in cake production, freshness is measured in minutes. If you're already hooked on the idea of massive cake-making robots, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because we're about to speed down the conveyor belt into the most hypnotizing part of the process. And trust me, you won't want to blink. The high-speed cake highway. Imagine a freeway, but instead of cars, you've got hundreds of shiny metal pans whizzing along at an almost comical speed. That's what the cake conveyor looks like. The batter doesn't get scooped. It's dispensed by nozzles that work like precision surgeons. Each nozzle knows exactly how much batter belongs in each tin, and it fills them in less than half a second. This happens across dozens of pans at once, creating a mesmerizing waterfall effect of batter dropping perfectly into place. And because air bubbles are the enemy of a smooth cake, factories use vibration tables to gently shake the pans before baking. It's the industrial version of tapping your cake pan on the counter. Only this machine can tap 300 pans a minute. The conveyor system is a marvel in itself. It's timed so that every pan reaches the oven at exactly the right moment. Not too soon, not too late. That timing matters, because the batter can't sit too long or it starts to lose its rise. Watching this process is addictive. You could stand there for hours, just mesmerized by the rhythm of pans zipping by, batter dropping in perfect portions, and trays gliding into the oven like they're boarding a dessert roller coaster. And speaking of ovens, that's where the real transformation happens. Baking at industrial scale. If mixing batter is the warm-up act, the oven is the headliner. And trust me, this headliner has stage presence. Forget the little box in your kitchen that takes 10 minutes to preheat. Industrial cake ovens are tunnel ovens, some stretching over 100 feet long, and they're kept at baking temperature all day, every day. The batter-filled pans enter one end, ride along a moving conveyor, and emerge at the other end as golden, fluffy perfection. But it's not just about heat, it's about controlled heat. Engineers, yes, not bakers, but actual engineers, carefully calibrate temperature zones along the tunnel. The first section blasts the batter with high heat to set the structure. The middle section gently cooks through, and the last section drops the heat to avoid drying out the cake edges. And here's a fun secret. Many factories deliberately bake their cakes slightly underdone. Why? Because once the cake leaves the oven, the residual heat inside keeps cooking it for a few more minutes, like how a steak continues to cook after you take it off the grill. This method ensures the cake stays moist without turning rubbery. Humidity is another key player. Too dry and your cake becomes crumbly, too moist and it turns gummy. Industrial ovens have built-in steam injection systems that add the perfect amount of moisture into the baking chamber. It's a delicate balance, off by even 1%, and you'd notice it in the final product. And get this, the average tunnel oven can bake thousands of cakes an hour, and it never needs cool-down breaks. Some run for weeks at a time without shutting down, except for quick cleaning shifts. The efficiency is mind-boggling, and a little intimidating if you're used to babysitting one tray at a time in your home oven. Once the cakes are fully baked, they roll seamlessly out of the oven and straight into what I like to call the chill zone. Cooling, the conveyor chill zone. Here's the thing about cakes, they're fragile little divas when they come out of the oven. Still soft, still steaming, and extremely prone to collapsing if you handle them wrong. That's why cooling is just as important as baking. Factories solve this problem with cooling conveyors, often designed in a spiral or multi-tiered layout. Picture a giant cake escalator, except instead of moving you upstairs, it's gently ferrying thousands of steaming cakes through perfectly chilled, filtered air. Some cooling conveyors stretch the length of an entire warehouse wall, spiraling upward like a stainless steel slinky. This design saves space and maximizes cooling time without taking up a football field's worth of floor area. And it's not just about temperature, airflow matters too. Fans circulate clean, filtered air around the cakes at a controlled speed. Too much airflow, the cakes dry out. Too little, condensation forms, making the surface sticky and ruining the texture. It's a precise science, and computer systems constantly monitor every variable. Here's something most people don't know. Cooling too quickly can cause the cake center to sink. That's why the air is kept at just the right gentle chill, often around room temperature. So the cooling process mimics what you do at home, just on a much larger scale. By the time the cakes leave the cooling conveyor, they're firm enough to handle, but still soft enough to absorb frosting without turning into a crumbly mess. Which brings us to the factory's most visually satisfying stage. Decoration, the robot artists. This is the part that makes people's jaws drop when they see it for the first time. You expect to see a line of pastry chefs with piping bags, delicately frosting each cake. Instead, you find robot arms and automated nozzles doing the work faster, and honestly more consistently than any human could. Frosting machines are calibrated down to the millimeter. They know exactly how much icing to apply and in what pattern. One machine might do a smooth layer all over the cake, while another adds decorative swirls on top. These machines can switch patterns on the fly, so 1 minute they're doing a rosette design, and the next they're writing happy birthday in cursive. Some factories still keep humans in the loop for final touches, adding chocolate curls, sprinkling nuts, or placing fruit by hand. Why? Because certain toppings are too delicate or irregular for a machine to handle without smashing them. And here's a fun fact for trivia night. Some decoration robots can frost over 1,000 cakes per hour without stopping. Compare that to a skilled human decorator, who might manage 30 to 40 an hour if they're working fast. Also, the type of frosting matters. Cakes headed for local delivery might use whipped cream or mousse, which are soft and fresh but can't travel far. Cakes going nationwide, they get buttercream, fondant, or a stabilized frosting that can survive days of shipping without melting. Watching this stage is oddly hypnotic. The perfect swirls, the precise patterns, the conveyor moving at just the right pace. And if you're wondering whether they ever make mistakes, yes. Sometimes a frosting nozzle hiccups, and a cake gets a modern art look. Those usually end up in the break room. Packaging, the cake's suit of armor. Now comes the unsung hero of the cake's journey, packaging. This is more than just throw it in a box. A cake's packaging is its suit of armor, protecting it from bumps, temperature changes, and curious fingers. First, many cakes head to a blast chiller to firm up the frosting just enough so it won't smudge in transit. These chillers drop the temperature fast, but not so cold that the cake freezes, because frozen cake tends to lose moisture when thawed. Once chilled, the cakes glide toward wrapping stations. Here, either a plastic dome is lowered over the cake and snapped into place, or a clear film is wrapped tightly around it. Some machines heat seal the film with pinpoint precision, using just enough heat to shrink it without melting the frosting underneath. Factories are also very strategic about labeling. Barcodes, expiration dates, allergen warnings. All of this is printed and applied automatically. In some places, QR codes are added so you can scan them and see where and when your cake was made. And here's a modern twist. Some factories now have tamper-evident packaging, so you can tell instantly if the cake has been opened. It's a small thing, but it gives people peace of mind. At this point, the cake looks ready for the store shelf, but it still has one final leg of the journey. Shipping, the cake commute. If packaging is the armor, refrigerated trucks are the chariots. Cakes are loaded into large cartons, stacked onto pallets, and rolled straight into temperature-controlled trailers. These trailers keep the environment at just the right coolness, usually between 35 degrees Fahrenheit and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, to keep the cake fresh without freezing it. Some factories ship locally, with cakes reaching stores the same day they're made. Others send them cross-country, which means they could spend 2 or 3 days in transit before landing on a shelf. What's crazy is how efficient this system is. Many cakes go from raw batter to retail store in under 48 hours. That includes mixing, baking, cooling, decorating, packaging, and transportation. And yes, mistakes happen. Sometimes a pallet tips, and a few unlucky cakes get squished. Most of those don't go to waste. They're either donated to local food banks or devoured in the staff cafeteria. By the time your cake hits the store shelf, it's traveled more miles than some people do on vacation. And yet, it still looks like it came straight out of a bakery case. That's the magic of industrial cake logistics. The end or the beginning. So, here we are, at the end of our cake's factory journey. From a river of flour to a perfectly frosted centerpiece, the process is part engineering marvel, part culinary art. But here's the twist. The end for the factory is just the beginning for you. The real magic happens when the cake becomes part of a celebration. When candles are lit, slices are shared, and someone gets a little too much frosting on their nose. And maybe that's why cake factories are so fascinating. They're not just making dessert, they're mass-producing happiness, one conveyor belt at a time. So the next time you pick up a cake from the store, remember, somewhere, in a humming building filled with stainless steel, mixers, ovens, and robot decorators, a small army of machines and people worked together to make sure it was perfect just for you. If you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes journey, hit that like button, share this video with your sweet-toothed friends, and subscribe for more stories about how everyday foods are made. And tell me in the comments, if you could design a cake factory, what's the one crazy feature you'd add? Personally, I'm still rooting for a conveyor belt that delivers slices directly to my couch. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.